that he chose to research, which was the causes of the Civil War. The Civil War was the war between the North and the South of the United States. The war lasted from 1861 to 1865. The causes of the war were the disagreements between the enslavement of people or slaves in the United States during that time, and this led to much controversy and issues because the people believed that some causes overpowered others. This war is known as one of the most deadliest wars in the United States and has led on forever.
In the North and the South, the economies were very different from each other. Their views on slavery and sectionalism were total opposite, and they had diverse ideas about states' rights. The northern economy was based on their geographical state. The farming there was open, but not vast, since their fields were more broken up, and they had a lot more hills with less room to fit agricultural production. The weather in the north didn't suit the idea of farming, so that was never their main focus. Instead of outdoor farming, the North had the idea of manufacturing. The seaports in most of the states would take products like cotton and turn them into textiles. So in the North, their main focus was in growing the crops. They had a better idea, and that was to use these crops and make something even more beneficial to their economy. Because of reasons like this, the North didn't depend on slave labor, because there wasn't much needed of them. Instead, they relied on the help of immigrants in need of labor. The North started aiming toward urbanization because of all the production of valuable textiles. If we took a little trip to the South, we would come to see that they were the ones more reliant and attached to growing. The geographical benefits of fertile soil and vast open lands along river basins made agricultural boosts more likely. The South was known for having large-scale farms. These farms would produce an excessive amount of supply for just one crop. These crops would bring majority of the economic profit to the South. These crops included rice, tobacco, cotton, and indigo. So in the South, the people lived on plantations. The plantations were like little towns that were owned by only one person. The slaves on these fields would each develop one type of crop. Slavery had begun to disappear in the North because farming wasn't as much of a need to them. The South, on the other hand, believed slavery was very important because their whole economy and lifestyle depended on it. The idea of making profit off of slaves was beneficial to them because the slaves provided free labor. Chattel slavery was very big in the South. This meant that the slave master owned the slave. The slave master saw the slave as property, and that's why they felt like no one could take the slaves away from them. Since the North had seceded from slavery, they developed this form of abolition. This movement was where people wanted to end slavery because they believed it was evil. Some historical figures such as Frederick Douglass and John Brown believed this too. Their conversation would keep rising leading up to the Civil War, because the North didn't feel there was a need to keep slavery. Sectionalism was the idea that people from the South saw themselves as Southerners, and people from the North saw themselves as Northerners, and this led to the issue that neither of these regions saw themselves as Americans. They didn't see themselves as a united country. It was more of an envy game. The reason of them seeing themselves as different were from the fact that they had different views and morals. You could see the split economically and geographically, and it felt like you were in two different parts of the world, not the United States. They had no reasoning and wouldn't put themselves into the other shoes on the other side and see what the life was like in the other side of the country. States' rights was also a big issue, because the South didn't agree with most of the laws that the North had passed. The South believed that states shouldn't have to follow the laws they didn't want, because they were called the United States. They were scared of the North passing a law to end slavery, and they were going to have to follow it. This issue had already come into play when South Carolina ignored a law that affected only the southern states. The law was a tax on cotton, and because the South was really reliant on the profit of cotton, this law really hurt them. The South became defiant and said they didn't have to follow any of the laws that they didn't want to follow. When Abraham Lincoln came into office, many Southerners saw him as an anti-slavery president. They argued that they didn't want him as their president, and they seceded from the United States. The South formed the Confederacy, or the Confederate States of America. The Northern people thought this idea was absurd because they were all one country, and the South still had to follow these laws that they passed. And so when the Confederacy broke away, the North was known as the Union. All these reasons were the causes of the Civil War on a more analyzed spectrum. In the end, the Union and the Confederacy fought until the Confederacy surrendered to the Union. The time after the Civil War was known as the Reconstruction era, where the South was trying to become part of the Union again. Martin Luther King once said, "War is the greatest plague that can afflict humanity. It destroys religion. It destroys states. It destroys family. Any scourge is preferable to it." Thank you for listening to my issue or topic on the ideas or causes of the Civil War.